So hello and welcome to all. Thank you for coming here. Nice to see you. It is a pleasure to see so many students from various faculties of Vilnius University, the Faculty of Philosophy, with its future social workers, social policy makers, maybe sociologists and criminologists also will join us. The students from Faculty of Mathematics and Informatics, I hope they are with us online. I'm also glad to welcome practitioners. I believe they also are online. And welcome to colleagues from Vilnius University and from abroad. Today we are going to speak about AI implementation and use in social services, and I am pleased to introduce our guests from Canada, computer scientists who, in collaboration with social workers, social work professionals, are creating various AI-based systems for social services. So please welcome Professor Mark Fox and Professor Bart Gajderowicz. They will give their presentation, and after that we will start our discussion. And I invite you to share your thoughts, to make questions. So, dear colleagues, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be here. This is my first visit to Lithuania. My mother was born 100 kilometers north from here in Ukmergė. So I went to Ukmergė yesterday to visit the town and see where she walked the streets. So thank you very much for inviting us, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Do we know if people can actually hear me on Zoom? Is there any way we can verify that? Yeah, everything's good? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief introduction, well, maybe not so brief, introduction to the Center for Social Services Engineering at the University of Toronto. And then I'm going to talk about two projects that we have underway within the center that is related to the social services sector. And then Bart will take over and talk about two other projects that we have underway. So this is really not meant to be a technical my presentation is not going to be of a technical nature. I'm going to focus more on the nature of problems that we are working on and the approaches that we're taking to address them. And so that's one point I want to make. And the other point I want to make again is that we use a lot of artificial intelligence, but that is not necessarily neural networks and ChatGPT. That's only one type of AI that we use. There are other types of AI that we use that we will mention somewhat in passing. So I will start with what my journey has been. Are we still okay? Okay. I'll start with what my journey has been in the area of the whole social services sector. Part of my non-academic life is spent working with organizations that you would view as in the social services sector. And I have been on the board of multiple organizations, agencies, et cetera, in this sector. And one of the organizations that I worked with or was on the board of and participated with provided food and clothing, et cetera, to people who live on the street, and also provided various training services. So taking people who live on the street and training them how to use a bank account, training them how to interact with other people in a reasonable way, like don't get too close to them when you're talking to them, training them how to maintain a one-room apartment. So the basic things that you all know how to do, but they're living on the street, they've either never had or lost those abilities to do the basic things in their life. And so as part of that organization, they asked me if I would live on the street for 48 hours. So the idea was I walk out of my home with no money in my pocket and just my cell phone, and see what it's like to live on the street for 48 hours. I lasted 36. Okay, I couldn't live on the street for 48. It was too difficult for me. It was too difficult from the point of view of the weather. I couldn't sleep at night. It got too cold. I couldn't sleep during the day because I was being eaten by insects. It was very lonely because if I would be begging for money on the street, people would pass me by. And even if they gave me money, they would never look you in the eye. So you were all alone out there at all times. And I knew that within 24 hours, I would start talking to myself. And so when you see people on the street who are talking to themselves, there's very good reason for that, because they have nobody else to talk to. And so it was a major learning experience for me. And I decided based upon that experience that it's time that my community, which is the computer science and engineering communities, begin to focus on issues within the social services sector to see if there's anything that we can do from a technology point of view that would be relevant, helpful, et cetera. So that's what got me into this whole area. And then when I decided to start the Center for Social Services Engineering, the very first thing I did, and am I talking too fast or are we okay? We're okay, okay. The very first thing I did was I met with about a dozen different senior people within the social service sector from a variety of different services that were out there, whether it be shelters or food or psychiatric care, et cetera. I asked them what was the major challenge that they had. And they said, we don't have the resources we need. Everybody said we don't have the resources we need across the board. And I look at this and I ask myself, and so you look at the situation and you ask yourself, why don't we have enough resources? Are we not spending the money? Are we not providing enough support? What's the problem? So I'm going to show you some numbers from Canada. Canada has over 170,000 nonprofits and charities and thousands upon thousands of government agencies at the federal level, the provincial level, and at the municipal level. Okay. And if you just count the number of organizations, not the number of people, just the number of organizations that are providing some type of support for people who are in need, it's just mind-boggling. And I'm going to refer to them now as social purpose organizations, or organizations that focus on the social needs of society. Nevertheless, with all of these organizations spread all throughout the country, the needs of the poor, the immigrants, refugees, et cetera, are not being met. And a country as rich as Canada, the question still remains, how can we effectively and efficiently match the supply to the demand? So here's the key insight. It's not that we don't have enough resources. It's we don't have the right resources in place for the right people. Okay? So it's a mismatch between what we have, who needs it, and where they are. And part of this problem is actually, what's interesting about this problem is that we have, as I said there, 170,000 nonprofits and charities. They don't really coordinate anything. The way I look at it, I'm sorry to say this, the way I look at where the money goes in the social sector Sadly, if you have a relative that passes away, the money goes to the hospital. Whether that money needs to go to the hospital or not, it goes to the hospital. Okay? And so we're driven by the pain that somebody has who has money. So if somebody dies of overdose of drugs, then those people are giving money to the overdose of drugs charity that they create. And the reason why we have 170,000 charities, nonprofits, is because everybody likes to create their own nonprofit. And 50%, if not more, of the money goes just to the administration of that nonprofit as opposed to directly to the people who need it. And so we have a huge waste of money because of the administrative overhead spread across these hundreds of thousands of organizations. And we have a huge waste of money and resources because we don't have the right ones in the right places. So the question is, how can we more effectively and efficiently match the supply that we have to demand? And so the major focus of the Center for Social Services Engineering is to create technologies to support social service workers in navigating the myriad of services to meet the needs of their clients. So we focus on a particular problem, which is if you are a social worker and you're managing clients and they have needs, where do you go to satisfy those needs? Okay? In the Canadian context, with all of these nonprofits and charities, you're not even knowledgeable of what's out there. And if you are, you're not knowledgeable about the restrictions they have on what they provide. And you may not be knowledgeable of what it is that they provide. And so already, before you can make a decision, before you can say, hey, go over here, you're not aware of the options that are available to you because there's too many of them. And they may not be appropriate to you. So we started our journey in the whole social services area with creating, and this took place back in 2015, 2016. So we're almost 10 years ago, creating a smartphone app that allows somebody to search using keywords, very simple system, search using keywords for a particular service. And so there was a taxonomy of services. The keywords were used to search those taxonomy of services. You had an interactive map that would pop up with where the services are. You get detailed information, language options, hours of operation, et cetera. And that would help the person who lives on the street or wherever to be able to find whatever services they have. We had a number of problems with that. First problem was we could not find funding to continue the support of this. It's sort of, we're working in an area that the social work side of the world isn't interested in it, and the world in which the technology, engineering, computer science part of the world isn't interested in this. And we're also working in the world where do you get that information? How do you get information about 170,000 different charities and nonprofits? Where does it come from? Okay. You ask that question when you go back to your classroom or whatever. Where is all this information sitting? And the answer is it's not sitting anywhere. Anyway, so we built that. And what we discovered is that there was greater interest on the part of social workers and police and firefighters, et cetera, those who have to respond to the people in need, than the people who have need. Now, you may ask yourself a question, why would somebody who's living on the street actually use something like this? I mean, they don't have phones. Well, I don't know about Lithuania, but I know that in Canada, the people who live on the street have phones. They don't necessarily have the top-of-the-line smartphones, but they have a phone. And the reason why they have a phone is very simple. It's their lifeline. It's the only way they can be reached. So if they go to a shelter and they need some identification, how does the shelter contact them when they're not at the shelter? It's the phone. So the phone is a single point of contact that's available to everybody. And when people are living on the street and they're trying to raise money, what are they raising money for? First and foremost, they're raising money to pay for their cell phone plan. So the first $20, $30 that they make on the street goes towards that cell phone plan, then the remainder goes to whatever it is that they're going to spend it on. Well, It was an interesting experiment to do that, but we decided that wasn't good enough. And we were working with an agency that was dealing with immigrants, refugees, et cetera. And we decided that what we really need to do was solve that problem of how do we efficiently and effectively match up resources to the needs of the individuals. Well, if you're going to do that, you need to know what the client's needs are, okay? And to meet the client needs, you need to know what their problems are, okay? And then based upon their problems and their needs, you can then begin to look at what services and goods are available. So we started work on what we refer to as a social needs marketplace. And when we started work on this, we thought it would be this web-based system that's out there that anybody can access. But the problem is two problems. One is the people who have needs don't know how to articulate them well. Okay, so them using this system may not generate good results because they don't know how to specify what their needs are in a way that we could match against. And the second is privacy. If you're dealing with agencies, they don't want to share information in some public area about their clients. So privacy said the information we gather has to be kept within an agency so that the social needs marketplace shouldn't be something sitting on the web that anybody can access, but it should exist with copies in each agency, and that each agency has their own version of the social needs marketplace. Just checking the time so I can give Bart time. Anyway, so each agency needs their own copy. And so we rebuilt this whole social needs marketplace to be agency specific, but more than that. And I'll talk about that in a few slides. Let me just finish off by saying that in order to actually build an application that can represent client characteristics, client problems, client needs, client constraints, and also represent the service providers, what they provide, what needs they satisfy, and what the restrictions are on providing it, we need rich representations of both the client and we need rich representations of the social purpose organization. So we refer to all the different charities, et cetera, government agencies as SPOs, social purpose organizations. So we need a rich representation of that. And by rich representation, I'm not talking about just some random text. I'm talking about information that's structured in a way that a computer can understand as opposed to what people understand. And it's structured in such a way that the terminology is common, is shared, as opposed to just random words. Okay, and I know we live in the time of ChatGPT, and you believe that you can just put in random words into anything and it'll solve the problem. The answer is it doesn't work. And Bart is going to get to that in his presentation. So don't believe everything you've heard or done with ChatGPT. For these types of tasks, it doesn't work very well. So we had to have a rich representation of all of this information represented in the application so that we can actually reason correctly with that. And so the question is, how do we represent clients and SPO information? What have we done within the Center for Social Services Engineering? Number one is we've created what's called the Common Impact Data Standard for modeling SPO impact models and also their reporting. So what is an impact model? I'm going to get to that in a few slides, but we created something that is being standardized across Canada for representing SPO information. And that Common Impact Data Standard has been included in what's called the Compass Ontology, which provides complete information on clients, their history, their needs and constraints. And they provides complete information on service providers, donor, goods and services, need satisfiers and constraints or restrictions. And we also created something called the 5087 series of city data standards. These are general standards that have been approved by ISO for representing information about the city at large, because you can't represent just information about a client. You have to represent where things are located, what times they're available, what the structure of the city is, the neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all part of it. And the next problem that we had to address is, where do we get the data? So these data models that I talked about just tell us what the terminology is. It tells us how to refer to clients, how to refer to their needs, how to refer to their constraints, where constraints with clients may be, I have mobility issues, and therefore I can only travel within 1 kilometer of where I'm living, or I'm not available on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever. There's a variety of constraints. Or I have a vision problem, and so that restricts what I can do. So where do we begin to populate our database of social purpose organization impact models information? Well, that's a problem, because you can't find impact models for social purpose organizations. Because most social purpose organizations don't even know what an impact model is, let alone have documented theirs, let alone have actually published it in a place that we can review it. So if you take all the standards that we've created, you will find that there may be information about these social purpose organization embedded in their website, their brochures, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a variety of sources of potential information for us to understand what it is social purpose organizations do and who they do it for and what are the restrictions. But it's all just unstructured text. And Bart will talk about how, no, you just don't put ChatGPT on it and get the information from it. So Bart is leading the SMILE project, which he's going to talk about, if I give him enough time, that is able to extract this information from unstructured text to allow us to populate our database of SPO impact models from that information. And then finally, and so I'm still talking about the whole focus of the Center for Social Services Engineering, what we need to enable is a better understanding of service sector performance. Because if we're truly going to be efficient in the allocation of resources across the country, we need to understand how the resources are being used. Who are the clients? What are their characteristics? What needs they have? What are being satisfied? What aren't being satisfied? Where are they located, et cetera, et cetera. And so imagine if all the social purpose organizations had their own copy of the social needs marketplace, our application that we built, and we're able to take all that information and put it into a knowledge graph, a database, if you will. We will be able to begin to do analyses as to how effective and how efficient we are in meeting the needs of the people that we need to help. That's the ultimate goal of what we do. And so what I'm going to do is very quickly go through two applications. One is the social needs marketplace, and the other is the common impact data standard. Anyway, the social needs marketplace goal is to provide a simple to understand and use platform for SPOs to store and manage client and SPO information, ensure continuity of institutional knowledge. What does that mean? It means social workers change from one agency to another, from one location to another. Bring a social worker up to speed very quickly as to what are the resources that are available within their catchment area. Match clients to goods and services based on client needs and constraints and SPO needs, satisfiers and restrictions, and allow agencies to share goods and services information and refer clients in a seamless, effective way. So the social needs marketplace is not only a matcher of needs to need satisfiers, but is also a referral platform that allows you to then refer your clients to the other agencies. Social needs marketplace is built on a knowledge representation that we discussed earlier, which is the Compass and Common Impact Data Standard. what we refer to as ontologies, but you can forget that word. Just refer to as knowledge representation. And it has comprehensive matching, which is able to take the characteristics and needs of the clients on the left and match them up with the goods and services that are available from different SPOs on the right. And we also enable sharing. And here's where we get to a more efficient social services environment in terms of resource allocation. In the world that our SPOs work in Canada, each agency, each SPO has their own set of clients, has their own set of donors or services, okay? And they do their own internal matching. When they don't have a donor or service that meets the needs of their client, they then reach out to some other SPO that they know about. They don't know about everything. They don't know about what they have. So they're very limited in what they can do in terms of reaching out. And so what the social needs marketplace does is it has the ability to manage clients, has the ability to manage the SPO's goods and service provider, has the ability to match them so that you can meet the needs of your own clients. But if your own clients' needs can't be met by what you have, what do? Well, if each SPO, each agency is running their own version of the social needs marketplace, then you can share goods and services between agencies. And I'm not saying all your goods and services. You can designate which goods and services you want to share with another agency. And those goods and services will become available visually to the other agencies and also for automatic matching. In addition to that, if there are third-party services which are not agencies that have clients, but they could be providers of furniture or providers of training, they don't have their own clients, instead other clients are referred to them, they too can share their services, their resources with everybody involved. So now we're creating a more efficient and effective sector because we're achieving higher levels of sharing across the different agencies, SPOs, service providers, et cetera. And as more and more begin to share, higher utilization of the resources that are there. What's the status of this? We have an alpha version that is complete. It's built on top of our knowledge representations, has a client management module, service provider management model, constraint-based matching of client needs to service provider needs satisfiers, also does referrals management. That's part of the interface. I'm not going to go into any depth here, but the interface on the client side allows you to go in, provide information about the client and also what their needs are, and then it will automatically find a goods or a service that meets the needs of the client, subject to all the constraints like distance they can travel, catchment areas, whether the service provider says, I only deal with immigrants or refugees or women or whatever the case may be. All of that is taken into account when you're doing the matching. So now I'm going to quickly go into the Common Impact Data Standard. So before I get to what the Common Impact Data Standard is, let me talk about impact. Impact is the intended and unintended changes that occur across the organization and with its stakeholders over a period of time as a result of the organization's activity. So impact modeling has been introduced over the last, 20 years, 30 years. You've heard about it with names like logic modeling. There's 6, 8 different names for it or versions of impact modeling. The problem that we have in Canada is that the people who tend to self-select to be in the social services area do not really like mathematics, do not really like computers, really like anything that smacks of a quantitative analysis of the world. And so as a result of that, the self-selection of the people within the field are more qualitative in orientation. High levels of empathy, high levels of concern, etc. All good characteristics, okay? But what we find is that people within the sector often have difficulty thinking in terms of how do I measure whether what I have done is successful. So the common response I get when I talk about impact modeling with people within the sector is, we're unique, you can't measure us. Okay? And you are unique, doesn't mean you can't be measured, but you are unique. But that's the common refrain. And what the whole social services sector within Canada in the government level is trying to do is move in the direction of greater measurement of their investment, okay? And I choose the word investment explicitly because the government, the funding agencies, view it as an investment and they want to understand if they're getting a return on their investment. And that boils down to impact. Am I having the impact on the stakeholders? And I use the term stakeholders because we use that in the impact modeling world. On the people that want to impact, and how are we impacting them? Okay? It's not enough to say I had 30 people come through a training program with me and use that as your metric. That doesn't tell you you have impact. It just tells you you had enrolled 30 people in your training program. What you really want to know is what's the level of skill they had when they exited that program? And are they working in a job that uses that skill? They really want to understand, did what you do really have the impact you hoped for? And did you measure it? So the, oh, here I am again. See if we can get this working. So this impact measurement arises out of work that was done in the UK by the Impact Management Group. And they came up with 5 dimensions of impact. What, that is, what outcome has occurred in the period, whether the outcome is positive or negative, and how important is the outcome to the people. Number 2, who experiences the outcome and how underserved are the affected stakeholders with respect to the outcome. So the what is, you may want to increase the number of skills they have, or you may want to train them as to how to cook, or open a bank account, or manage their money properly, or whatever, or housing related, etc. Who could be female, indigenous, teenager, mother. How much of a change? So if you're providing skills, how many skills? What type of skills are we talking about? If we're talking about providing housing, how long do they stay housed? So different things could be measured, and how much scale, depth, duration gets at different attributes of how, because duration becomes important. If I'm dealing with drug, people who have a history of drug use, how long are they free of drug use? Not just free for the first week after they leave the course or the first day. Contribution, would the change likely happen anyways? And 5 is risks. And to that we add a 6, which is how does the organization deliver impact? So those are the dimensions, and back here. Those are the dimensions. So what we were asked to do, we were part of a larger group called the Common Approach. We were asked to come up with a data standard. That is, it's nice to talk about these things abstractly, but how do you actually represent all this information? How do you represent the impact model, and how do you represent reporting? So the impact model defines what your organization is trying to do, and the reporting tells us how successful were you in doing it. Who here has learned impact modeling in your social work courses? Okay, so I'm the only one, and I'm not a social worker. Okay. So we came up with this common impact data standard. And first and foremost, what it does for the sector is it provides a framework, a vocabulary with which you can talk about what the organization's trying to do. And without having that vocabulary, you can't create a model of impact. Provides a common terminology for describing impact, enables the exchange of data. Wouldn't it be nice? Well, maybe you don't care about it, but I care about it. Wouldn't it be nice if different SPOs can exchange data about their impact models and how well they're meeting their goals? Especially important in this day and age with reporting back to who your funders are. And if you're not already being asked to report back on what your indicators and things like that are, you will be. Enables a global conversation to achieve a sharing and convergence of outcomes and indicators within the domain. What does that mean? It means that we are making the transition from a social services sector where everybody talks and measures themselves differently to a sector where there may be a common set of outcomes and indicators, metrics that are used across social purpose organizations, are used to compare each other, and are used to identify what are best practices. Because in the end, it's all about best practices. It's not about saying, I'm better than you, you're better than me, or whatever it is. It's about recognizing what are the best practices that are achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. Because that's what it's all about. At least I think so. So I'm going to very quickly do the next couple slides, and I'm going to hand it over to Bart. We have time. How much time do we have? Till 3:30? 4:30. 4:30. Okay. So this is just a very high-level view of the main terminology that exists within the Common Impact Data Standard. So for example, we have an organization up at the top, and I'm sorry for the people on Zoom. Well, maybe I can do that. There we go. We start with a representation of the organization, and there's all sorts of information associated with this. I'm only giving you the very high level terminology. Organizations have impact models. Impact models have programs that deliver services. Programs have services, and services have activities with inputs and outputs. That's most of the non-impact modeling portion. Impact models have stakeholders. What is a stakeholder? Any type of person that the social purpose organization focuses on. As I said earlier, female, teenager, mother, whatever. Stakeholders have outcomes, and these aren't outcomes that the stakeholder has, but which the social purpose organization has for that stakeholder. So as an organization, the outcome you want for these single mothers that are teenagers and indigenous is to perhaps teach them certain skills that make them more independent or successful, perhaps in raising a baby, perhaps in managing their money, perhaps related to housing. You as an organization have a set of outcomes you want to achieve for the stakeholder, okay? And what we see here is the outcomes, the general outcomes, things are associated with the risk of the outcome being achieved. We have indicators that are associated with the outcomes, so we can measure the outcomes. We also have characteristics of the stakeholders, which is that single, female, mother, indigenous, whatever the case may be. And in the white, we have different ways of reporting on the achievement of the implementation of this impact model. And using this, you can represent logic models, outcome change, logical framework analysis, theory of change, interact maps, outcome maps, etc. All of these form the basis of any of those methods of modeling. I'm going to skip over this. What's the status? 2.1 of the Common Impact Data Standard has been completed and is available on the website that you see there. It's distributed as part of the Common Approach project, and a data analytics platform is being completed for the integration of data that is represented using this Common Impact data standard. Why? Because we want to integrate data across social purpose organizations and begin that analysis of what are the best practices across different SPOs. Secondly, from an adoption point of view, the Common Impact Data Standard is being aligned with by Microsoft, Salesforce, and other software vendors. It's being adopted by the Canadian federal government for reporting by over 800 agencies. It forms a core of software products, of which HelpSeeker is one, but a variety of others. And it's embedded in what's called the Compass ontology, which extends the client and SPO modeling to incorporate a broader set of needs and needs satisfiers. So I think I'm at the end. So we're going to take questions at the end. Bart is going to take over at this point.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Bart Gajderowicz. I'm a researcher at the Center for Social Service Engineering. I've been working with Mark since 2013 on this. And the way that I started in this, I have a completely computer science, industrial engineering background. But when I started working on this, I decided to sort of dive right into it and work at a homeless shelter for 8 months. And initially, in Toronto, and initially the purpose was to really kind of learn about the sector, gather information, understand how things work, et cetera, et cetera. And I did learn that. I interviewed people, I interviewed clients, I interviewed people that worked there. But the main thing I took away was a deeper understanding and appreciation of the clients, the people that actually use the shelters, what their needs are, and sort of the struggles that they have, and the social workers that work with them. One thing I learned was it takes 6 months to a year sometimes to gain someone's trust, for them to actually give you the information that you need, right? It's a conversation. It's never a, here's what we're going to do to help you and everybody's happy and we're just going to go on. No, it's a conversation. And what I started focusing on is having a conversation about, on the engineering side, is having the conversation about what do clients actually need? What are their needs? What are their goals? Why aren't they getting them? What services are available and how do we get them, right? And social workers really play a central role there because they're the conduit. They're the ones that sort of get that information. So that's kind of the motivation for this work. So what I wanted to cover today is, sort of the problem definition, what we're trying to address, some of the motivations and insights that we gained. So I'll start with the insights and then I'll finish with some of the details just to kind of give you some context in the beginning. So now this data is a bit old now. These reports don't come out as often as they should, but back in 2016, the report came out that there were 35,000 homeless people living on the street and any single day. And that was actually a 17% increase from 2014. And there's different demographics that are included in that. The actual service sector, there was in 21, there were 65,000 different service providers. Now, Mark's figures included a bigger chunk of that, of the services that are actually out there, some of the agencies, the charities. But I was strictly focusing on the service providers that are registered as service providers that we can actually get data on. There are, nearly 5 million people who live in poverty, so not just homeless, like the first figure, but just living in poverty. These are also people that use services that are often not considered in a lot of the statistics. And then there's new immigrants. Canada has a lot of new immigrants every year, and those people use the services as well. So there are different people that come in, different lived experiences, different histories, and all of that is for a very diverse group of people that use these services. Some key insights from sort of the work that we did, or the work that the group did back in the day, was that there are different limitations just on the clients themselves, there are different limitations that clients or homeless people suffer that are not considered in the general population. And so you have to sort of, now I know you know all this, but when we think about this from the engineering, these are the things that we've learned, that we really have to use different social models to view this population. The current ones don't work. The social norms that oftentimes are applied to social studies, social populations, don't apply to this population. And because of this, their choices are often viewed as irrational, random, right? So often you'll say, well, why is this person doing this? You know, I gave him money for food and he went to buy alcohol. Why did they do this? That was silly. And as we started studying this, it's not that it's irrational. It's actually very rational. It's a very rational decision for that person at that moment in time based on what they needed and their lived experience. When we started looking, so once we started to figure this out, we started looking at different models to study this behavior. And what we found was that traditionally large-scale simulations, they try to sort of close the gap between studies and implementation. Right? So you try out a intervention program in a study, then you try to implement it, and it usually doesn't work. And we try to understand why. The models that are sort of data-based are probabilistic, but those are based on their past policies. Okay, so when you try to implement a new policy in the new political climate, maybe many of these don't actually work. Okay, and again, social science models are generally based on one set of social norms, whereas the homeless population or people that live in poverty have a different set of social norms. So sometimes they just fall apart. And what we needed to find out is how people will respond to future policies, future political climates, future societies. And these existing models aren't always applicable. So what we decided to do is create a high fidelity model that can try to simulate this seemingly irrational behavior using a computer system which are by definition rational. We're trying to create irrational behavior with a rational reasoner. So the question was, given a bounded observer, so this is the person who's actually observing clients and trying to analyze what they're doing, understanding that they themselves are limited in the information they have, can the seemingly irrational behavior of, again, these cognitively limited bounded agents be emulated using this rational reasoner? And the hypothesis was that yes, we can. So the goal was to evaluate these different social service policies using this simulation. And finally, the objective was to develop this high fidelity model that can mimic this behavior. So what we found was, yes, within some limitations, you can use a computer simulation to reproduce or emulate some of this seemingly irrational behavior. What's important is to understand the cognitive limitations of individuals. The fact that they have constantly changing goals and needs. That traditional, which I call neoclassical theories of behavior, most of them from economics, don't apply to this population for various reasons, mostly because of the different social norms and the different goals that they have. And the results were that the best models that emulate this behavior recognize various cognitive limitations and also the dynamic environment with which they exist. So both of those need to be modeled, not just the individuals, but the system as well. So at a high level, this is what a simulation looks like. You have a set of agents, they're all interacting, and the data to define the agents and their interactions come from various sources. Could be a model of the service provider, of the client, it could come from different data sets, and it could come from the data can come from different intervention programs. And I'll talk about the one that I used for this work. So what does this actually mean? So we have a client who has certain needs. Let's say that they're not healthy, they're unsafe, and they're unhoused. And they're not just going to go to one service provider and get all of these needs met. They're not going to go to 20 different ones in order, in the right sequence, and all the resources are going to be available, and they'll get all those needs met, and then they won't be homeless anymore. It doesn't work that way, right? They're actually going to go through a variety of services in certain sequences, right? They're going to go through a variety of these paths to actually reach their goal. And this is a very complicated thing to do. It's very complicated to manage. Okay. So what did we specifically look at? We looked at the needs and the goals of the clients. Okay. We looked at how goals are ranked. So which goals are important? How do you decide what needs you have right now and which needs you're going to have a year from now, 20 years from now, tomorrow? Will you survive the next week in the winter? Okay. And also how these goals change. So it's not just ranking them, but actually how they change. How do their goals change in response to different services as they're being delivered? So first thing we did was we partnered with Calgary Homeless Foundation, which is an organization in Canada which manages 65, now it's actually 120 different shelters. And they're able to coordinate the services and move the clients between the services when needed. Now, this particular program was the Housing First intervention program. You might be familiar with that. But it tracked 4,000 clients for 6 years. Housing First is a self-directed program, if you're not familiar. Essentially, you're placed in a home and then you're given all the resources that you need once you're housed. So there's no prerequisites. And you don't have to move between different services. You're given all the resources that you need. And every 3 months, an assessment form is given out. And the assessment form essentially asks the basic needs that are at the bottom there. Okay? And from these basic needs and the other field, which allowed people to specify specific things they needed, we extracted 768 different types of basic needs for the clients in this particular program. Those needs were then mapped onto what I call an ontology of social service needs. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But essentially, we tried to categorize these needs along different dimensions. So dimensions here are the need itself, the goal that the person has, what motivates that goal, the constraint that is preventing them from achieving that goal, the resource that is required to help them achieve it, and the service that will provide that resource. And this was mapped onto Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is it's a ranking of needs. It's not really accepted as a ranking anymore, but it does have very good categories. So, for example, shelter might be categorized as a physiological need for someone who is chronically homeless. So, someone who's living on the street, having shelter is actually a physical need that they have because they will be in trouble if they don't. Whereas for someone who's relatively homeless, it's a security need. So they're not going to die today if they don't have a home, but it is going to help them with having a secure, healthy life. Okay, so what does this actually look like as a representation that a computer actually understands? So this is an ontology of needs. So we start off with an agent, which is who's the client. Okay, let's call him Bob. They have a demographic. Let's say he's a homeless youth. And what he's interested in, the outcome, the eventual outcome is having a safe place to live. So goal here is to have shelter. Their motivation is to be safe. This goal, shelter, is a type of ranked goal. So it's not just a goal, but it actually has a specific ranking. So for this person, we call this an agent-based preference ranking. So how does this person actually rank shelter? To themselves, not to anybody else, but to themselves. Okay? So let's say that they rank them 5 out of 10. Okay? 5 out of 10 because the current shelter that he's in is fine for now, but he might want it later, might want a better shelter situation in the future. Okay, the second ranking is Maslow's hierarchy. So this is where you actually rank it along this hierarchy that I mentioned of different levels. So you identify what shelter actually maps to in this hierarchy, and then you give it a ranking. So in this case, shelter is part of the security level. Okay, so it's 2 out of 6. Okay, But then there's this other ranking. And this is the ranking where this person and their needs fit in the social service system. And so just because a person needs something doesn't mean that the resources are available. And so we have to consider when those resources are actually going to be available and rank those accordingly. And so here we actually identify what the constraint is. Okay, let's say that they don't have a referral to a housing program. Okay, what they need is an apartment. That apartment is created by the housing assignment service, and that is provided by the Housing First program. And only at the end, once all of this is done, these constraints are met, the resources are provided and available, will the eventual outcome of the person be met, which is to be safe and to have a home. Okay, so this is the third ranking, which we call a practical ranking, which considers this, the actual resources and services provided. Okay. So just based on this model, what we have, we tested it under three kind of hypotheses, these questions that we had. Okay. Can we capture the client's needs, the constraints and demographics? Yes, we can. Can we connect them to the actual services that are being provided? Yes, we can. And can we emulate client behavior? So here we couldn't, because it's just a static representation and a mapping between needs and services. So here we actually need a simulation. Okay, so let me talk about the simulation a little bit. So the simulation called BRAHMA stands for Bounded Rational Agent Motivation Framework. And this is, I won't go into the details here, but essentially it tries to understand these sort of limitations of clients, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and what's called the emotional cycle of change. And what it found was that to emulate human behavior, we need to be capable of generating a plan. That plan has to be executed and then monitored to evaluate how well a person is actually doing. And at the end, we have to be able to what's called replanning. So whenever the person gets to a point where they can't move further, we can't just force them to keep moving in the plan. That just doesn't work. It doesn't emulate the way people think and move through the system. So we have to have the ability to pause and then perform replanning. So this is sort of a technical diagram. So for the IT people in the crowd, this is probably more what you're used to. But essentially, what we have here is a search tree of different paths that people can consider and the different choices that they can make. And the neoclassical approach is that there's one optimal path, and that's the path that's the most rational, and that's the one that you should always choose if you're a completely rational agent. Okay, so let's say that this is the yellow. The orange path there. Okay, but people have bounds. People have limitations. The first one is time bound. You simply don't have enough time to consider all of the choices that you have, right? So being completely rational agent is just impossible because you'll never be able to consider every single option. The third one is cognitive bound. Not everyone has the cognitive capacity to think deep into every single scenario, every single situation, and consider anything that can come up. And finally, we have information bounds. We just don't have all the information. We can't consider all of the information that's available out there to make the best decision. Next is ranking. So making decisions is one thing, but actually figuring out what needs to be done first, what I need first, what goals or needs need to be met first, that isn't always clear. So you can rank it based on, let's say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs here in this pyramid. Okay. And this will change which path you actually choose, because you're not choosing what's most optimal based on this neoclassical theory, but based on your own needs. And finally, another thing we found was that as people move through a intervention program, they're not always optimistic, right? Things get hard. So while in the beginning, they might be optimistic and they might plan to do a lot of things, eventually they will actually drop off. And it becomes very hard. And at that point, they go in what's called the valley of despair. Okay? They get demotivated. They start looking to which goals they actually need to get, right? Their immediate needs need to be met. They start forgetting about these sort of long-term goals. That's the model. So here's some results. The first one, based on the tests and the data that we had from the Calgary Homeless Foundation, we were able to confirm the first question here, that you can actually simulate irrational behavior or seemingly irrational behavior using bounded rationality. And what I'm highlighting here is a set of configurations. Where am I here? Yeah. Okay. So these configurations here are the different configurations of the model, and what they found was that. Oh, sorry. Okay. So the section highlighted there in green, this is what's telling us that the cognitive and time biases were instrumental in getting correct results. So things that could mimic what actually happened in the data. The second one was that the type of search strategy you use, so the way that you kind of generate your plans, didn't have an impact on a successful emulation. So we had to try something else. So here, what this graph highlights is that the emotional cycle of change actually was very important. Because what the emotional cycle of change allowed us to do is determine when a person stops executing the current plan, their current goals, and starts replanning, right? So starts reconsidering their options again, okay, based on this value of despair is what it's called. Okay. So once we incorporate that emotional cycle of change, we were able to emulate this sort of replanning and reconsidering of their options over time. Okay. All right, so I won't go into this summary, but that's essentially the way that we emulated the behavior of homeless clients in the Housing First program. Okay. So we had some data. We tried different models to emulate the data as best as we can, and those are the conclusions, right? So we had bounded rationality, right? So cognitively limited agents. We had emotions, okay? So people weren't, they're not robots. They have emotions, they have feelings, and the ability to reconsider their plan and their options at any given time was key. So that will be a project. Let me talk about another project. So this is the project that Mark mentioned. This is SMILE. And SMILE is essentially a system that tries to capture the common impact data standard components, those impact models that Mark mentioned, from text. Okay. So already covered most of this. One thing I'll mention is that, again, these social purpose organizations often work with some kind of impact model. There is those elements of an impact, an organization, stakeholders, they are there, but they're not there formally. So very often they're presented as descriptions of services, and it's for us to try to extract that information. But we'll be working with the same impact model that Mark presented. So here's an example of what an impact model in text looks like. So this is a standard description of what an organization does and for whom. Okay, so the YMCA provides language assessment and classes to new immigrants and their families, helping them obtain gainful employment. Okay. Now, as a human, you sort of understand right away what they do and to whom. But if we want to sort of understand these impact models at scale, we have to let a computer do it, extract this information, and then be able to put these different services together and align them in a way that a client can actually move from one service to another to meet their needs. And so what we do is try to identify these ontological components in the text. So for example, in the yellow here, we have the organization that's providing the services. In green are the actual services themselves. In the blue are what we call beneficial stakeholders. So these are people who benefit from these services. It could be the clients themselves, their family, their communities, and so on. Okay. Then we also have the outcomes. right? What are they actually looking to achieve? Okay, it's not always the immediate thing that's provided by the service. It might be an eventual thing. Okay, so once, for example, if you pass a course that is going to help you find a job, it doesn't mean that you'll actually get a job. Once you have the job, that's when the outcome is actually met. So we started applying these large language models, ChatGPT, and so on, for this task. We tried to understand how well it can perform. And the first thing we noticed was that there aren't too many language models that actually understand social services and impact models. Okay, these are general models that perform well on general topics. But if you want to start talking about domain-specific topics, they don't perform as well. The descriptions that they use are vague, so they might be easy for a domain expert to understand, but for a computer to work with, it's much more difficult. There's a lot of variability in the results. There's no standard vocabulary. There's a general lack of structured data, so there's no databases to get this information from, and the information that is actually produced by them is hard to analyze for their validity. There are other kind of limitations of ChatGPT specifically, which I won't go into. But first thing I wanted to mention is our project where we're actually trying to create a structured database of these services. And what that means is taking the text descriptions and annotating them. And here we actually use the concepts in the Common Impact Data Standard to annotate different parts of the text. And we have social service domain experts actually do this for us. So these aren't just graduate students from any department that do this. This is actually a very difficult task. There's a lot of nuance here. And so what we do is try to capture that sort of domain knowledge from social service experts to infer these different concepts in a text. These are the concepts that we focus on for the current test. So essentially, we try to identify who the beneficial stakeholders are, who the organization is, what the program actually is, the different services, and what the outcomes for the clients are. Okay. So here's an experiment from ChatGPT. So you don't have to worry about reading all this text. There's going to be a lot of text here. I just wanted to give you an example of what it actually took to get some of these results. So basically, we start off with the prompt, giving it a definition of or a description of these different concepts that we're interested in. Okay. Then we gave it some specific instructions to be as specific as possible and give us a format that we can read, and gave it a description. Okay. So here's some examples of those kinds of prompts. Okay, so we ran it on 52 different social service descriptions. And here we focus on the true positives, the false negatives. The true negatives, so these are the ones that are correctly identified as not part of the impact model or not reported because they take up about 90% of the words in the text. So these are just things that we don't care about. Okay. But for some of these concepts, for example, for the program, we had 46% accuracy just from the descriptions alone, which sounds good, but I'll show you in a second why that 46% is actually really bad. 18% to identifying the different services, 27% correctly identifying the beneficial stakeholders, 41% for the organization, so at the high level, who's actually organizing these services, and 22% for the outcomes. We gave it some more information. We gave it more descriptions of these different concepts. We gave it all of the concepts together so that maybe ChatGPT can figure out what the differences are between, a service and a program and an organization internally. So we saw slightly better results, but still nothing breaking 50%. Okay. And we gave it some additional information. Again, we're not really hitting that 50% mark for the green true positives there. Okay. So then we gave it the actual ontology, the actual Common Impact Data Standard. And so you don't have to know what this looks like, but it's really a text file that has all the definitions of these different concepts and how they relate to each other. So we gave that, and we're hoping that ChatGPT can actually reason about these and make the connections that we gave it explicitly about how a beneficial stakeholder benefits from a service, how the service is provided by a program, and so on. Again, the results weren't that great. Okay, we're hitting about 30% for the program name. Only 25% of the beneficial stakeholders were found. So these are, who the clients were. We gave it some more information. We got slightly better results. We gave it additional information. In some parts, the results were better. In some parts, they weren't. And so what does all this mean? So when you have 20 or 40% success rate in a commercial application, what that generally means is that 20 to 40% of the time, you're recommending a client the wrong product to maybe purchase, which isn't that big a deal. But when you have only 24% true positives or correctly identified concepts, that means that you're only capturing a subset of the population. And if you try to actually use this in any automated way or at large scale, you're not going to be sending people to the right services. What does less than 50% false negative metric look like? It means you're missing a lot of services that you would need to actually connect a client to the right services that they need. And false positives, these are services that or clients that you're miscategorizing. So these are people who you say are one type of client, but they're really not. These are the services that you say that they perform one thing, but they're actually not. Okay, so you're going to be sending people to services that can't help them. Okay? And in general, there's a lack of consistency among these generative models because they're based on probabilistic patterns in text, not in what the actual concepts are and how they relate to each other. So I'll quickly kind of summarize our project of how we're trying to address this. So if you can imagine, we have our impact model that is partially categorized correctly. So the green parts, let's say, are categorized correctly, right? So these are a high degree of certainty that the true positives are there. The red concepts are not captured correctly. Okay, so we have a low certainty that they're correct. And what we try to do is use any number of systems, whether ChatGPT or other systems that we can query to correct these the red spots, okay, to maybe fill in the white spots that haven't been found at all. Okay? We want to extract different services, different clients, and we use different methods and technologies to actually do this. We're not limited to one. Okay? That means that we have to coordinate a lot of the results that we actually produce, find the good ones to then find the ones that are missing. We fixed some of the hypotheses or the data that's produced. And we do this in sort of this iterative way. So we keep improving the actual model and the different concepts to make sure that they all turn green. So we kind of do this in an iterative process. Okay, so maybe for the sake of time, I'll pause there. And thank you for your attention. I guess we'll do a question and answer if there's time. All right, thank you.
So I'd have a question for Professor Mark, I believe. What exactly would guarantee that the client would actually listen to the application? Like, let's, for example, say they have the appropriate resources, they get the offered help, but they don't have the enabler to help them go and actually get what they need. So what would make the client actually listen to the application?
So we actually don't want the client to use the application. One of the things that we learned early on is that we really do need the social worker or the client manager to be the interface between the application and the client. And so we don't worry about that particular problem because we don't make that assumption that they use it directly. And so it's going to be whatever resources the social worker has available to them to assure that the client goes and sees whatever service that they have been recommended. which is an uncertain, it's a problem. As a human being, we can't guarantee that the client is going to show up. Okay. So I'm not going to make the statement, oh, well, these automated systems are better because they can track you, and, you know, when the person shows up, you get a signal that they've shown up, or a signal if they don't show up. You can make all those types of statements, but, you know, the bottom line is you got to leave it up to the social worker or the client case manager to do the following up with this.
Thank you. May I have a following question?
Sure.
How exactly would your application differ on what's a good social worker and what's not? Like, how would you prevent it from being abused from, let's say, a person who's not a social worker somehow signing up and pretending to be one?
So we don't want this available to the general public. So we specifically designed it so it'll be used by caseworkers, case managers within agencies, and not by the external public. Because having the external public access it is fraught with misuse, privacy concerns, all that type of stuff. We decided early on that we don't want to address that. We don't want to create a system that we cannot protect in ways that are appropriate. And so it's up to the case manager, again, to act as the interface to the system and use it as a decision support system for the case manager, and not as a system to be used directly by the clients themselves. I know in this world, we want everybody to directly access everything themselves, et cetera. But we didn't think it was appropriate in a situation like this.
Thank you for your presentations. And I wonder, well, we met with both presenters last week during the conference for social work and artificial intelligence, and there were many debates related to whether robots will take jobs from social workers or not. And there were lots of different opinions on that. So given your expertise and experience, what do you think your innovations that you suggest, how will it impact the employment of social workers? Will there higher demand for them, or fewer social workers will be needed? And I think the same applies to social policy professionals.
So I don't think we have, if this is used the way we envision it, that is, the social needs marketplace is used the way we envision it, it doesn't have any impact on employment, because we view the social worker, the case manager, et cetera, as the one who's using the system. So this is really a decision support system for the social worker and not a replacement for the social worker. There's a number of challenges with respect to using a system like this. First and foremost, if you're going to interview a client, it's a social worker who understands the terminology of the field in terms of what are the characteristics of the client, what are the needs of the client, et cetera. Client walking in doesn't have that vocabulary, that terminology. They don't know in their head, they don't have that structure of the information in the field to allow them to be effective in their use of a system like this. It's really the social worker that has to sit in the way. So I don't see it having any, that has any impact on it. I always think of it, not always, but from this conference, I think of the reverse situation, which is how can we extend the capabilities of the social worker? So I ran into an interesting, to that particular question at the conference, and I was thinking to myself, if you look at the social work profession, if you look at the social services sector, if you were to do a good job of meeting the needs of your clients, would we need double the number of social workers that we have now? Would we need 10 times the number of social workers that we have now? Because clearly, I think, we don't meet the needs of everybody. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough resources. Okay, so the issue isn't, are we going to lose jobs? The issue is, how can we use this technology to amplify your ability to provide services that you need it? Because clearly, and this is not the profession's fault, It's just the issue of demand that exists there for your services. Clearly, we're not meeting the needs of everybody. So how can we do better? So the bottom line is, when you have somebody like us who are on the technology side, the question you shouldn't be answering yourself is this going to replace me? The answer is, how can I control the evolution of this technology in such a way that it enhances my day-to-day work? Okay? And so you shouldn't be sitting back and just waiting for the people like us to spend time in the social services sector and develop an understanding of it, et cetera. You should be grabbing hold of it and saying, okay, how can we shape this to meet our needs as a social worker so we can do a better job? And that's the spirit of this whole thing, is how can we help you to do a better job?
I have a question as well. So nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Ligat and I'm from Israel. I'm a social worker and I also have a PhD in public health. So I'm from implementation science field, and I guess you know implementation science, right? Because originally it's from computer science. So it's the field of examining intervention in theory and examining it in practice, and the gap between the two is the thing that interests me. Actually, I really love the presentation. I felt like it's the continuance from the conference, the fact that I feel like those tools are actually tools for us as social workers to operate in the world. So my question is, you are computer scientists, you're not social workers, and I wonder, when you do the ontology and grouping and defining all the social assessment needs and whatever, did you use interdisciplinary team in order to define it? Who is the team behind the creation?
So there's two parts to the answer of that. The first part is we started doing research within the social work sector. And so our whole model of needs satisfiers, et cetera, arises out of models that have been developed within social work. And there are half dozen of these models that we were looking at. And so we dive into the social work literature to understand that. So all of us have read a variety of things in this area. The other part is we work with a company called Help Seeker, which is a technology company for the social services sector. And they are primarily composed of people within the social services. And so they are our experts in terms of every aspect of delivering social services. And they provide us a huge amount of input on the nature of the terminology, the taxonomies, things of that nature. So it's not just us doing reading, it's them with their practical experience, et cetera, modifying what it is that we come with. So it's a group effort to develop these taxonomies, et cetera. Just trying to think if there was another part now. I'll stop.
I saw Noah, Natalie, whatever. I saw a list of people. One of your slides, actually.
Yeah, there's
a bunch of people that are.
Well, I think that after your question, that computer scientists, social workers, other disciplines should work together in order to try to explore it better. Only working together, not separately, may create something that all of us can use and be productive.
That's why we came to a social work. Any other questions?
If I can, a bit more technical about the agent-based modeling. So I saw you have like accuracy. So what's the scale of simulation and how you validated it? And also what's the practical approach? You can simulate the whole market and then infrastructure resources or something else.
Sure. Yeah, so the metric, so that graph that I had there at the end of my first presentation, basically it was, the accuracy is how many of the needs were matched between the simulation and the actual data, and in the same order. So we wanted to see if we were actually emulating what needs the client needed at every step of the process. And so there was a couple of lines on that graph. It's because we use different error metrics. So is it an exact match? Is it 1 away, 2 away? What is considered a success? And so the best results there were, if we were within 2 goals out of, let's say, 50, then that was successful. That was yeah.
Yeah, and from the practical side, so you did this with 4,000 applicants, as I understood, and 65 million in total. So it's a smaller scale. And did you plan to scale up like the simulation and make it more applicable?
So no. So there were 1,000. There were I think 4,000 individuals in the data set. 1,000 of them were actually in, just over 1,000 in the Housing First program. And within those, there were only, I think, 30 that we actually had complete data for the 2 years. One of the issues was that the data is very sparse. So we have to be very, very careful about which data sets we actually, or which data points we actually use and make sure that they're complete. So to build the model, to build the mapping between the needs, the basic needs, and the 58 categories of needs, there we used all of the 4,000 individuals over 5 years. But to actually check the metric, or to validate the model, we identified 7, I think, different service categories. And then within those, we found 21 people with a complete history of interactions with the services. Sorry, 30 individuals that interacted with the services.
And now you can use it for like modeling future trends or for the practical side.
Yes, that's the way it was designed, so that you can essentially. So the other thing we did was that when we actually modeled what services were available, we looked at what was actually available in Calgary at that time, and what was offered by the service providers, and so then we mapped that. So you can imagine taking this and just saying, okay, these services aren't available, but these ones are. And this is how they map to the needs of the client, and these are the types of needs that they have, right? So you actually, it's meant to be kind of configurable in that way.
So you can check how many needs you fulfilled and how quickly, let's say, and if you change the services, infrastructure, how.
That's right.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And about the second part, language models, so you used 3.5 version or? 4, and it still wasn't very good. But you didn't try to use the fine tuning or?
No, not for this one. So to fine tune it, you need 2 things. You need a lot of data, which we're saying doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. Or you need a human to actually interact with ChatGPT to tell it, to figure out where it's wrong and where it's not. And so this is where the system is actually trying to mimic that kind of decision making, to actually identify where it's wrong and then what prompt is needed to correct it.
And did you try to use like a reflective agent? Now we are doing this, let's say you got the prompt, you got the answer, then you input the answer to the second input and ask to audit it. Is it like correct or not? Can you improve it or leave it as it is? So do like ChatGPTs interact with people.
Yeah, so this is where the next kind of level is. Now that we know kind of what the issues is by just giving it the definitions directly, now we can start interacting with it and to correct it, to give it the next prompt.
Okay, like the agent LLM. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we did try different LLMs. I didn't present the results here because I haven't compiled them completely yet, but we did, from the data that we do have already from the annotations of our data set, we are training like BERT models to, like Roberta, right?
Yeah.
To fine tune them on this particular domain. But it's still inconclusive as far as how well they are performing.
So I just want to respond to the questions regarding the emulation of homeless people. Doing this project, from my perspective, had a very big challenge, and that is if you're going to build an agent that emulates a homeless person in their decision-making, so that ultimately you can use that agent to evaluate social policy. So if we change our social policy, simulate the homeless people to see how they respond to that change in social policy. That's the ultimate goal. The problem is, what data do you test the agent on? Okay. Where does there exist data that tells me the path that the homeless person has taken over time, so that you understand what they did and under what conditions they did it? And that type of data is not readily available. Bart showed you the data that we were using from the Calgary Homeless Foundation. If you look at that, so every 3 months, the Calgary Homeless Foundation asks the individual homeless person a set of questions as to what needs to be satisfied, what their new needs are, what the same needs are, et cetera, et cetera. And part of the problem that we run into is, A, the people who are asking the questions are not adequately trained to ask the questions in a consistent way from meeting to meeting. It may not be the same person who's asking those questions every 3 months. And the way the responses are given, they are vague, and it may not be the case that the answers actually correspond to what you think they need. And so there's a high degree of vagueness, variability in this interview process that is contingent upon the interviewer and also contingent upon the person being interviewed. And so when that data itself can contain a high degree of uncertainty or variability, it becomes a real challenge to understand whether what your emulator is doing is consistent with what the data is telling us that they were doing. You're not sure what the data is telling us.
But that's why you have this ISO standard.
Well, that's another thing. The impact model is more important because, or the Compass system is more important because Compass extends the impact model with the taxonomies for needs and et cetera, et cetera. And so if that was available to the Calgary Homeless Foundation when they did their studies, then the results of their studies would hopefully be more precise and more accurate.
Two questions. There was question, are you creating these programs together with social workers? And I have the question, is somehow involved in process of creation the users themselves? Or
So for the social needs marketplace, we worked with an agency in Toronto that deals with refugees, immigrants primarily. And so they were continuously providing us feedback over a period of 4 years.
But are like refugees or homeless people themselves participating in this?
So again, we don't use this directly with the clients. It's meant to be used by the case managers, by the social workers.
Okay.
So we were working directly with the case managers.
Okay. And another question, I was very interested about the emotional cycle of change. Could you just a little bit more tell or some examples about this?
Sure. So the theory is, I think, from the 70s, and it was originally published or studied on nurses to understand how their decision-making about their patients occurs through their shift. And so, they get sort of emotionally attached to their patients, et cetera, right? So that's where the actual theory came from. It was presented to me when I was working at a shelter. I was attending the workshops with clients that the case managers were running, And it was basically a way for them to explain the emotional or the emotions that people are going to experience as they move through a program, intervention program. Okay. And then when I started looking at it, I started realizing that this is actually a very often used way to understand how clients move through an intervention program, but it's not studied at all. I had on my PhD committee, I had a social work professor and a clinical psychologist who works in the homeless domain and addiction. And both of them sort of pointed me towards other literature that were similar or complementary to it. So that's where the theory actually came from. So it wasn't I just pulled it out of the air, right? It came out of practitioners in the field. In my work, I realized that I could contrast it with this neoclassical way of reasoning about goals and the way people maximize their utility, their abilities to do things, right? Where only rational people seem to kind of, right? And so I realized that this is a very well studied or very the formula for this and the way that it was constructed is complementary to the planning model that I was creating.
Do we have more questions? If not, our guests will still be here for quite some time after this, so maybe we can ask them questions individually, because I see that our time is running. Probably the questions from here. No questions. Yeah, so I think that's all for today. Thank you everyone for joining, either live or online. The guests are still here, so feel free to ask questions. And then thank you, and I wish you